My name is Sheriff Rebecca Holloway, and I've been the elected sheriff of Boone County, Missouri, for 18 years now. Before that, I did 7 years as a detective with the Columbia Police Department and another 5 years with the Missouri State Highway Patrol working drug interdiction on I-70. I've investigated multiple homicides, worked undercover operations that put dangerous people in federal prison, recovered bodies from the Missouri River that had been in the water for weeks, and dealt with situations that would make most civilians question their faith in humanity. I tell you this so you understand that I'm not someone who scares easily or jumps to conclusions based on emotions rather than evidence. I deal in facts, in procedure, in documentation that will hold up in court. Or at least I did until May 17th, 2024. Before I tell you what happened in the area we call the Pinnacles, before I explain why I can no longer respond to calls on Route M after midnight, and why I've started keeping iron nails and red thread in my patrol vehicle for reasons that would get me committed if I tried to explain them to the county commissioners, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this video, if you follow these stories from sheriffs and officers who've encountered things that exist outside any legal framework we're trained to handle, please subscribe and like this video. What I'm about to share violates every confidentiality agreement I signed when I took this office. But after what I witnessed, after what I became, silence feels like complicity in allowing others to suffer the same fate. And I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? Have you ever been to central Missouri, to that rolling country where limestone bluffs rise up out of dense hardwood forest and the caves go down so deep that no one's ever found the bottom? Have you ever felt like the trees were listening to you, like the rock formations were measuring you, like the land itself was deciding whether to let you leave? Drop a comment below. Tell me if you've felt it. Tell me if you've heard the singing. Boone County sits in the heart of central Missouri, covering 685 square miles of mostly rural territory with the city of Columbia as the county seat. Most people know Columbia because of the University of Missouri. But once you get outside the city limits, this is old country, ancient country, land that the Osage people lived on for thousands of years before European contact, and that still carries the weight of that history in ways most modern residents don't understand or acknowledge. The Pinnacles area is in the southwestern part of my jurisdiction, a region of karst topography where underground streams have carved thousands of caves and sinkholes into the limestone bedrock. Some of those caves have been mapped and developed as tourist attractions. Most haven't. Most are just dark holes in the hillsides that local kids are smart enough to stay away from, and newcomers don't know exist. Route M is a narrow 2-lane road that winds through the Pinnacles, connecting a handful of small communities and providing access to dozens of farms and homesteads scattered across the hills. The Osage had names for places in the Pinnacles that translate roughly to where the stone sings, or the doorways below, or land that remembers the old ones. French explorers in the 1700s documented strange phenomena in the area. Sounds like music coming from underground, lights that moved through the forest with no visible source, areas where their horses refused to go, and their compasses spun without finding north. American settlers in the early 1800s reported similar experiences, and several homesteads in the Pinnacles were abandoned not because the land wasn't fertile, but because the families living there claimed they couldn't sleep, that they heard voices at night, that their children saw things moving in the caves that looked human but weren't. Most of that history has been dismissed as frontier superstition or explained away as natural cave acoustics and limestone reflection creating optical illusions. But those of us who work this county, who respond to calls in the deepest hollows and the most remote caves, we know there's something else in the Pinnacles, something that has nothing to do with acoustics or geology, and everything to do with boundaries between worlds that should be impermeable but aren't. May 17th, 2024 started as a warm Friday evening. I came on duty at 1800 hours, reviewed the incident reports from the day shift, which showed nothing more serious than a domestic disturbance in Centralia, and a theft report from a farm near Hallsville, checked the weather forecast, which called for clear skies and temperatures in the low 60s overnight, and headed out to patrol the western part of the county. My patrol area that evening covered approximately 400 square miles of rural territory, including Route M through the Pinnacles. On a Friday night in May, traffic is light, mostly locals heading home from work in Columbia or farmers finishing evening chores. Most of my job is just being visible, checking on the handful of businesses that stay open late, making sure teenagers aren't drinking in the parking lots of closed schools, being available if someone needs help in an area where cell service is spotty, and the nearest ambulance can be 30 minutes away. I spent the first few hours doing routine patrols, stopped at a gas station in Ashland to get coffee, and chat with the owner about some vandalism he'd been experiencing, drove through a few subdivisions where we'd had complaints about speeding, checked on an elderly couple who lived alone on a farm, and appreciated the occasional visit. Everything normal, everything routine. Then at 2143 hours, I got a call on my radio that made everything change. Dispatch reported a 911 call from a landline, address placing the caller on Route M, approximately 8 miles south of Hartsburg, deep in the Pinnacles. The caller was a woman, sounding extremely distressed, saying she and her daughter had been driving home from a school event when they saw something in the road, something that looked like a person standing in the middle of the pavement, and when they stopped to help, their car wouldn't start. And now, there were more figures appearing from the tree line, and they needed help immediately. She couldn't describe the figures clearly, kept saying they were the wrong shape, that they moved wrong, that they were singing. The call lasted about 35 seconds before it dropped, and dispatch couldn't reach her when they called back. The phone just rang and rang with no answer. I acknowledged the call and headed south on Route M. I've responded to thousands of calls for service over my career. Most of them have rational explanations. Drunk drivers who seem threatening until you realize they're just confused. Wildlife that looks unusual in headlights. Teenagers playing pranks. I figured I'd find a woman and her daughter whose car had a mechanical problem and who'd worked themselves into a panic over deer or cows that had gotten onto the road. I figured I'd jump their battery, maybe call them a tow if needed, and send them on their way with a story about the time they got scared by farm animals. I figured wrong about everything. Road M through the Pinnacles is a winding road that climbs and descends through heavily forested hills, passing limestone bluffs that rise 100 feet or more on one side and dropping off into steep valleys on the other. The road follows an old Osage trail that later became a wagon route, and there are still remnants of early settlement visible in places. Stone foundations from cabins that burned or were abandoned. Family cemeteries with graves dating back to the 1820s. rusted farm equipment that's been sitting in the same spot for a century. In daylight, it's beautiful country, all green forest and gray rock and wildflowers in the spring. At night, especially with no moon, it's oppressive. The trees form a canopy that blocks what little ambient light might reach from the sky, and the curves come up faster than you expect, and there are no street lights, no houses with porch lights, nothing but your headlights, and the darkness pressing in from every side. I turned onto the Pinnacles section of Route M at 21:58 hours and immediately noticed that something felt wrong. The air smelled different. Not the normal smell of Missouri forest in spring, that mix of damp earth and new leaves and honeysuckle. This was something else, something mineral and old, like the smell of a cave, but stronger, more present, like the ground itself was breathing out air that had been underground for centuries. At the 5-mile marker, my radio began producing interference. Not normal static, but a sound like music, like voices singing in harmony, but at frequencies that were just slightly off, creating dissonance that made my teeth ache. I tried calling dispatch and got nothing but that singing, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost familiar, like a song I'd heard before but couldn't quite remember. I checked my cell phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual this deep in the Pinnacles, but the phone itself was behaving strangely, the screen showing the time as 21:58, then 22:34, then 21:12, jumping back and forth through different times without any pattern. I checked my watch, a simple analog watch I've worn for 20 years. The second hand was moving, but it was moving in pulses, advancing 7 seconds, stopping for 3 seconds, advancing 2 seconds, stopping for 5 seconds. Time was behaving wrong. I looked back at the road ahead and saw the vehicle. It was a silver Honda Odyssey with Missouri plates, stopped in the middle of Route M about a quarter-mile ahead. The hazard lights were on, but flashing at intervals that seemed irregular, creating a rhythm that was unsettling to watch, like a heartbeat that kept changing tempo. As I approached, I could see 2 figures standing outside the vehicle, a woman and a girl who looked maybe 12 or 13, both facing away from me towards something in the tree line on the right side of the road. I pulled up behind the Odyssey and activated my light bar, standard procedure, though something in my gut was screaming that nothing about this situation was standard. The temperature outside had changed dramatically. When I'd been 5 miles north at the marker, my external temperature gauge had shown 63 degrees, pleasant May evening weather. When I opened my door, the air that hit me felt like it was in the mid-40s, cold enough that my breath fogged, and I wished I'd grabbed my jacket from the back seat. But it wasn't consistent cold. As I walked toward the 2 figures, I passed through zones of temperature, stepping from cold air into warm pockets and back into cold again, like there were invisible boundaries in the air marking off different climatic regions. And I could hear singing, not from my radio anymore, but from the forest itself, voices harmonizing in patterns that sounded beautiful and terrible at the same time, calling and responding in languages I didn't recognize. I called out to the woman and girl, identified myself as Boone County Sheriff, asked if they needed assistance. Neither of them responded. Neither of them moved. They just stood there, maybe 15 feet from their vehicle, staring into the tree line. I moved up alongside them, and that's when I saw what they were looking at. There were figures in the forest, not people. Not exactly. They had roughly human proportions, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall, but they were too thin, too elongated, their limbs bending at angles that human limbs don't bend. And they were glowing, not brightly, but with a faint bioluminescence, like they were made of the same stuff as cave-dwelling insects that generate their own light, pulsing in rhythm with the singing. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing between the trees in formations that looked deliberate, arranged in patterns like they were positioned for some kind of ceremony or ritual. I asked the woman what was happening. She turned her head slowly to look at me, and I saw that her eyes were wrong. Her pupils were dilated so far that there was almost no iris visible, just massive black circles that reflected the pulsing light from the forest figures. When she spoke, her voice sounded distant and layered, like multiple people speaking the same words with slight delays. "They've been waiting," she said, "waiting for so long, since before the caves were carved, since before the stone rose up. They live in the deep places. They sing the songs that hold the boundaries together. The Osage knew about them. They made agreements. They brought offerings. They respected the threshold times when the boundaries were thin and the singers could come up from below. But we forgot. We built roads over sacred ground. We sealed the entrances to the singing caves. We violated the protocols that kept both worlds separate. And now the boundaries are breaking down. Now the singers are coming up more often. And they want us to hear them. They want us to understand what they've been doing all this time. They want us to know that the world we walk on is held together by their songs. And if they stop singing, everything collapses." I asked her what she meant by, "If they stop singing, everything collapses." What were the singers holding together? She smiled, and it was not a comforting smile, her lips stretching too wide, showing too many teeth. "Reality," she said, "the structure of space and time, the barriers between dimensions, their maintenance, their infrastructure. They've been singing the songs that keep our layer of reality stable for longer than humans have existed. The caves aren't just empty spaces in the rock. They're resonance chambers. They're designed to amplify and distribute the songs throughout the region. And the singers live down there in the deepest caves, in the spaces that connect to other dimensions, and they sing constantly, maintaining the frequency that keeps everything solid and predictable and safe. But they're tired. They've been doing this for millennia, without acknowledgement, without respect, without the offerings that were promised in the old agreements. And they're starting to wonder why they should keep singing for a world that's forgotten they exist." The singing from the forest grew louder, and I realized it was coming from the glowing figures, from the elongated beings that stood between the trees. The girl, who hadn't moved or spoken, suddenly turned to look at me with those same dilated pupils. When she spoke, her voice harmonized with itself, creating chords that shouldn't be possible from a single human throat. "They want you to hear, Sheriff. They want you to understand. Come closer. Listen to the songs. Learn what they're saying. Learn what happens if they stop." I should have gotten both of them into my patrol vehicle right then. I should have called for backup, for paramedics, for someone with medical training who could assess whether they were suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning or some kind of shared psychosis. But my radio wasn't working, and my cell phone showed impossible times, and I was standing on a dark road in the Pinnacles, watching figures that glowed with their own light singing songs that made the air itself vibrate. so I did the only thing I could think of. I walked toward the tree line, walked toward the singing figures, close enough to see them more clearly, close enough to understand what I was looking at. They weren't solid in the way humans are solid. They were more like projections, like holograms made of sound and light, manifestations of something that existed primarily in dimensions I couldn't directly perceive, but that were projecting themselves into my reality through the medium of song. Their faces, what I could see of their faces, were simplified, stylized, more like suggestions of faces than actual features. But I could feel them watching me. I could feel their attention focusing on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle and my heart race. And I could hear the songs more clearly now, understand that they weren't random melodies but patterns, mathematical patterns, frequencies that corresponded to physical constants, harmonic structures that described the fundamental architecture of reality. The singers were literally singing the world into existence, maintaining it moment by moment through the constant recitation of the equations and relationships that kept atoms bonded and gravity functioning and time flowing forward. I reached out toward the nearest figure, and the moment my hand entered the space where it was standing, everything changed. The singing stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone had hit a pause button on all sound. The glowing figures froze, their light dimming, and reality began to break down. The trees started to flicker, appearing and disappearing like images on a bad video signal. The road beneath my feet became translucent, and I could see through it to layers of road that had existed before. Dirt paths and stone trails and nothing at all. Just open forest floor, all of them occupying the same space. The air itself started to fragment, breaking into visible pixels like I was looking at the world through a low-resolution screen. And I felt it in my body, felt my cells losing their coherence, felt the bonds that held my molecules together weakening, felt myself starting to come apart at a fundamental level. Then the singing started again. The figures unfroze, the light brightened, and reality snapped back into solidity, everything returning to normal in an instant that felt like being slapped awake from a nightmare. I pulled my hand back and stumbled away from the tree line, my heart pounding, my breath coming in gasps. The singers moved closer, gliding across the ground without walking, and I heard a voice in my mind, not through my ears, but directly in my consciousness, speaking without sound, but with perfect clarity that bypassed all normal sensory processing. "You are a guardian," the voice said. "One who protects the surface world. We are guardians as well. We protect the structure. We maintain the frequency. We sing the songs that keep your reality stable. We have been doing this since before your species learned language. We have been doing this in the deep places, in the caves that go down to where your dimension intersects with others, in the spaces between layers where the mathematical relationships that govern existence can be directly manipulated through harmonic resonance." The Osage understood. They honored us. They brought offerings to the cave entrances on the threshold days when our songs needed to be strongest. They taught their children not to disturb the singing caves, not to block the resonance chambers, not to interfere with the maintenance. But your people came and forgot to ask what was here before you. You built roads and houses over the entrances. You filled in sinkholes that were designed to carry sound. You treated the caves as empty spaces instead of as the infrastructure that keeps your world functioning. And now we are tired. Now we are considering whether to continue, whether to keep singing for a world that has forgotten we exist. I found my voice, though it came out shaky. I asked what would happen if they stopped singing. The voice in my mind answered with terrible patience. Your reality would destabilize. The mathematical relationships we maintain through harmonic resonance would begin to degrade. At first, small things would fail. Atomic bonds would weaken. Chemical reactions would become unpredictable. Gravity would fluctuate. Time would lose its forward momentum. Within hours, larger structures would collapse. Buildings would phase in and out of existence. Living things would find their cells unable to maintain coherence. Within days, this entire region would revert to a state of quantum uncertainty, all possible configurations existing simultaneously, all timelines overlapping, all dimensions bleeding together. The Pinnacles would become a place where reality itself was negotiable, where the normal rules no longer applied, where anything that had ever happened or could ever happen would all be happening at once. And it would spread. The destabilization would radiate outward from this region, slowly at first, but accelerating, eventually consuming your entire planet. We are not gods. We are not demons. We are maintenance. We are the infrastructure your reality is built on. And we are asking you, guardian of the surface world, will you help us restore the old agreements? Will you acknowledge what we do? Will you make sure your people understand that the caves and the pinnacles are not empty spaces, but sacred spaces, working spaces, places where the songs that hold everything together must continue without interference? I wanted to say no. I wanted to get in my patrol vehicle and drive straight to the county seat and resign and move to somewhere flat and simple, where caves were just holes in the ground and singing was just music people made for entertainment. But I was standing on Route M in the Pinnacles with a woman and her daughter who were speaking with harmonized voices, watching reality itself flicker in and out of existence, being told that the world I'd spent my entire life protecting was held together by beings I'd never known, existed singing songs I couldn't understand, in caves I'd driven past 1,000 times without a second thought. I thought about the Osage elders who'd maintained the protocols for thousands of years. I thought about the French explorers and American settlers who documented strange phenomena and been dismissed as superstitious. I thought about every missing person case in the Pinnacles over the past 2 centuries, people who'd vanished near caves and sinkholes, who might have stumbled into the singing and been pulled into the spaces between dimensions where the singers worked. I thought about my duty, not just to enforce laws, but to protect people, to keep them safe from threats, even when those threats were fundamental forces of reality that existed outside any framework I'd been trained to handle. Yes, I said, just that one word. But it was enough. The singer that had moved closer pulsed brighter for a moment, and I felt something change inside me, like a frequency had been activated in my cells, like I'd been tuned to hear something I'd been deaf to before. The figures in the forest began to fade, their light dimming, their forms becoming less distinct as they withdrew back into whatever dimension they primarily inhabited. The woman and her daughter blinked, their pupils contracting to normal size, their expressions shifting from that strange, distant harmonization to confusion and fear. The woman looked at me and said in a normal voice, "Sheriff, what happened? We saw someone in the road and we stopped and then, I don't remember. Did we black out? Sarah okay?" I assured them they were fine, that they'd experienced some kind of momentary disorientation, that their car probably had an electrical problem that caused it to stall. I called for a tow on my radio, which was suddenly working again, and stayed with them until the truck arrived 40 minutes later. Neither of them remembered the singers. Neither of them remembered the glowing figures, or the songs, or anything they'd said in those harmonized voices. For them, it was just a strange episode where they'd lost a few minutes, nothing more. But I remembered everything. I spent the rest of my shift driving through the Pinnacles, and now I could hear them. The singers. They were always there, always singing. The sound just below the threshold of normal human hearing, but present, constant, maintaining the frequency that kept reality stable. And I could see the entrances to their caves, hundreds of them throughout the region. Some obvious sinkholes and cave openings, others just slight depressions in the ground, or cracks in limestone bluffs that looked like natural weathering, but that I could now perceive were deliberately placed to allow sound to travel between the surface and the deep places where the singers worked. I understood what I'd agreed to. I'd agreed to become a guardian of the agreement, someone who would make sure people understood that the Pinnacles caves were not empty spaces, that disturbing them had consequences that extended far beyond local geology. I researched in the weeks following that night. I had to understand what I'd become part of. I found Osage oral histories from the 1800s, collected by anthropologists who didn't understand what they were documenting, describing the singers as sacred beings who lived in the earth and whose songs held the sky up, who required respect and offerings and careful protocols for approaching their dwelling places. I found French colonial records from the 1750s describing caves in central Missouri where the stone itself appears to sing, and where trappers reported seeing luminous spirits that moved through the forest near cave entrances. I found geological surveys from the 1970s documenting unusual acoustic properties in Pinnacles caves, frequencies that seemed to propagate through the limestone in ways that didn't match standard models of sound transmission. And I found something else. A classified report from 1968, partially declassified in 2008, documenting a Defense Department investigation into acoustic anomalies in central Missouri caves, recommending that certain cave systems be designated as restricted areas due to potential interference with dimensional stability. The recommendation was never implemented. The report was filed and forgotten. I spoke to an Osage elder about 2 months after my encounter on Route M. She was in her 70s, a woman who'd spent her entire life keeping the traditional knowledge of her people, fighting to preserve wisdom that the dominant culture had tried to erase through forced assimilation and cultural suppression. She listened to my account without showing surprise. When I finished, she nodded slowly and spoke in Osage, then translated for me. "The singers have been in the caves since the time before memory," she said, "since the time when the world was still forming and the boundaries between dimensions had not yet solidified. They chose this place because the limestone here has the right acoustic properties, because the cave systems connect in ways that create natural resonance chambers, because the stone itself can carry their songs deep underground to the places where the dimensional boundaries need constant reinforcement. My grandmother's grandmother knew the proper ways to honor them. She knew the offering, days, the threshold times when their work was most difficult and they needed acknowledgement. She knew which caves were working caves that must never be disturbed and which were safe for humans to enter. Your people came and forgot to ask. You treated the land as if it were empty, as if nothing of importance was happening here. But the singers continued their work. They continued singing because if they stopped, both worlds would suffer. They're not doing this for your benefit alone. They're doing it because they live at the intersection, because they exist in both dimensions, because if reality destabilizes here, they lose their home too. You've been chosen to remember, to witness, to carry the knowledge back to your people, to make sure that when decisions are made about the caves and the land, someone speaks for the singers, someone represents their needs, someone protects the infrastructure that keeps everything from falling apart. The mark appeared about 3 weeks after my encounter. I was getting dressed one morning and noticed a pattern on my left shoulder blade, symbols I'd never seen before, arranged in geometric shapes that looked like sound waves or musical notation from a system I didn't recognize. It looked like a tattoo, but I'd never gotten a tattoo, and it definitely hadn't been there the previous day. The mark was slightly warm to the touch, maybe 3 degrees warmer than the rest of my skin. And when I concentrated on it, I could hear the singing more clearly, could feel the frequency in my bones. I've met 7 other people with the mark since then. One is a cave researcher who works throughout the Ozarks. One is a Native American liaison officer with the Forest Service. One is a geology professor at the University of Missouri. One is a caver who's been exploring Missouri caves for 50 years. One is a park ranger in the Mark Twain National Forest. One is a musician who studies acoustic properties of natural spaces. One is a tribal elder from the Osage Nation. We all have stories. We all have encounters with the singers, with the beings that maintain reality through harmonic resonance. We don't talk about it openly. We can't. But we recognize each other. We know the look in each other's eyes, the weight of knowing. The burden of protecting something most people don't know exists. I requested a transfer to a different county 10 months ago. The request was denied by the county commissioners without clear explanation. My undersheriff, a man who's worked with me for 14 years, pulled me aside after the meeting and said something I'll never forget. Some sheriffs are elected because they're good administrators. Others are kept in office because they have knowledge their county needs, even if most people don't know why that knowledge matters. You have that knowledge now. The Pinnacles need someone who understands what's down there, who can make sure that when developers want to fill in sinkholes, or when the highway department wants to widen Route M, someone speaks up for what can't speak for itself. That's you. That's been you since May. The commissioners know it. I know it. And everyone who's lived in this county long enough knows it. Your transfer was denied because you're needed exactly where you are. I think he knows. I think there's a network of people throughout Missouri and the Ozarks, officials and researchers and longtime residents who understand what exists in the singing caves and who work quietly to protect them. I'm recording this because I made a promise on Route M. I promised to witness. I promised to help restore the agreement. This is me keeping that promise. This is me telling you that there are caves in the Pinnacles where beings sing songs that hold reality together. If you come to central Missouri, if you hike in the Pinnacles, if you explore the caves, respect them. Don't disturb formations. Don't block passages. Don't make loud noises that might interfere with frequencies you can't hear. The singers are real. The songs are real. The consequences of letting them stop are catastrophic. If you ever find yourself in the Pinnacles and you hear singing coming from underground, singing in harmonies that sound beautiful and terrible at once, don't investigate. Don't try to find the source. Don't enter caves without proper training and respect for what they contain. The singers watch everyone who approaches their working spaces. They measure whether you understand what you're entering. And if you don't, if you treat their sacred spaces as entertainment or adventure without acknowledgement of their purpose, they might decide to show you what happens when the songs stop. Most people hike through the pinnacles without ever hearing the singers, but some are called. Some are sensitive to the frequencies. Some can perceive the faint glow of the beings in the deepest caves. And for them, the singers wait patiently in the spaces between dimensions, maintaining their eternal work, hoping for someone who will finally hear them, finally understand them, finally help restore the respect and acknowledgement they were promised in the old agreements. I'll be out there tonight. I'll be out there every night for the foreseeable future. I'll be patrolling Route M and the other roads through the Pinnacles. I'll be watching for people who show signs of hearing the singers. I'll be making sure no one blocks cave entrances or damages formations or interferes with the resonance chambers that carry the songs through the limestone. I'll be maintaining the new agreement between the surface world and the singers below. That's my duty now. That's the price I pay for saying yes on that dark road in May, for accepting the mark, for becoming a guardian of the infrastructure. The singers are always present. The songs are always playing. And now I can hear them, understand them, protect them. The caves remember everyone who enters them. The singers know everyone who acknowledges their work. And somewhere in the deep places beneath the pinnacles, in caves that go down to where our dimension intersects with others, beings made of sound and light continue their eternal singing, holding our reality together one frequency at a time, hoping that finally, after centuries of being forgotten, someone will remember the old agreements and honor the work they do. My name is Sheriff Rebecca Holloway, Boone County, Missouri, guardian of the agreement, keeper of the knowledge, witness to the singers below. Welcome to the Pinnacles. The caves are not empty. The songs are always playing. And somewhere in the darkness beneath your feet, beings you've never imagined are singing the world into existence, moment by moment, frequency by frequency, holding everything together with harmonies older than human language, waiting for the respect they were promised, the acknowledgement they deserve, the protection they need to continue their work forever.